Well, thank you very much, and welcome. As we say in Arabic, Salam alaikum, and peace be upon you is something very important when you talk about nuclear war, of course. Nuclear war, for those of you who are young, who are born in the 80s or 90s, you probably don't remember how much it was. A threat for, like, I remember being born in the 1970s. In my childhood, we lived under the constant threat of nuclear exchange between the Soviet Union and the United States. And I'm sure, Sheikh, you have the same age as my father. All of your life, you went through the history of this threat, which is not simply, when the first atom bomb was used on Japan, and the second also on Hiroshima and then Nagasaki. Joseph Stalin in Russia and Soviet Union, the leader of the Soviet Union, he at first dismissed this. He said, "Well, the Americans can destroy a city with one bomb in 1 second. I can destroy a city with my artillery in 1 day." And yes, it may be factually true, but in reality, everybody knew at the time that the nuclear war, nuclear weapons were changing completely the, the terms of war. And for those of us who are old now and remember how it was, believe me, when suddenly in the 1990s, with the collapse and end of the Soviet Union, we thought that this big danger would be gone. We were wrong, unfortunately. And when I wrote my first book about how we deal and how we survive with what I believe is coming, and it has already started, with the economic collapse on a global scale, I had to write a little paragraph on nuclear war and said, yes, there is the possibility of nuclear war, but I hadn't really thought about how you cope with it. And so it was a very short paragraph, and basically I dismissed it a little bit as either something that you cannot survive, or, well, I will then deal on a later scale. And incidentally, a year ago exactly, I started to think about this, and I was contacted by a gentleman who has been the specialist for nuclear, bacteriological, and chemical warfare for the French gendarmerie, the elite gendarmerie, the GIGN, le Groupe d'Intervention de la Gendarmerie Nationale in France. And he contacted me and said, well, I liked your books, and maybe we can write a book together. And so we decided and I researched this topic also because it was, of course, fascinating and very interesting for myself. And this led to a book which I have here. In fact, this is the first copy. Well, it's not a copy of the book, but clearly this is the last. I am still putting my last little changes of it, and it will be published in a few weeks, in a few months maybe. And of course, the topic is how you survive to nuclear, radiological, bacteriological, and chemical incidents, which can include warfare, of course. So here I will focus only on the nuclear part, and clearly this is something that anyone who watches the news today, honestly, has to. It has never been that possible since 1962. The last time we've been so close to nuclear war was 1962, when, during the Cuba crisis in October, between the 13th and I think the 19th of October of 1962, the United States Navy conducted an act of war against Cuba by making a blockade, and the Soviet sent ships to break that blockade. And during that very tense time, there was a day when one of the Russian submarines almost launched an atomic torpedo on an American nuclear carrier. And fortunately, the second in command of that submarine stopped the order and said, well, no, we need to be sure, because, in fact, the submarine was attacked by an American destroyer, but they were not real depth charges. They were duds. They were not real ones. But we were very close to nuclear exchange then. And so today, what do you need to have a nuclear war? Well, first of all, you need three things. You need first of all the nuclear warheads and the vectors to bring them to your objective. You need the opportunity, which means that you need to have some advantage or some rational or sometimes irrational reason, but at least a reason that seems opportunistic to use them. And we'll talk about that. And of course, you need the political will. You need the willingness to use them. It's not something that you launch by mistake. It is something that you decide. So let's first look at what are the countries today, the organizations that have nuclear weapons today. Well, clearly, they are the big military superpowers. It's obviously the United States of America. It's obviously Russia, which have thousands of nuclear warheads, much less than they used to. At the height of the Cold War in the end 70s, early 80s, United States had 16,000 warheads, and Russia had almost 40,000. That's a huge amount. Today, this is much less, but they're more precise, more advanced in technology. You have, of course, some smaller players like United Kingdom or France, which have about 200 warheads each. You have China, which also starts to have not only more warheads, but more importantly is the ability to project them with missiles, submarine-launched missiles. Of course, you have India and Pakistan, which each has about 100, and the vectors for local delivery. You have North Korea now. You have Israel, which has between 70 and 400, depending on the sources, and has capacity to launch them through cruise missiles and submarines. So it has the capacity to hit any part of the world. And of course, there is a big mystery on Iran. Is Iran developing nuclear weapons? We don't really know officially, at least. And then you have some other countries which could have atomic weapons very quickly. And these countries are Japan, South Korea, which have the engineering, the manufacturing, and the technical skills to build them in a few months, very quickly. And you have Saudi Arabia, very interestingly, which has a deal with Pakistan. They funded Pakistan's nuclear research and nuclear development. And there is a deal, and actually right now there's some concerns, or certainly in the news, we're talking about the ability of Saudi to receive missiles with nuclear warheads from Pakistan as part of this deal. So that's a few countries, but there are countries which may have political willingness in some scenarios to use it. The question also that remains open is, are terrorist organizations able to put their hands on nuclear weapons? And so far this has been extremely unlikely, and this is technical, but every nuclear warhead has a signature and has a sort of fingerprint, and the material which they are built is extremely tracked. And of course, the scenario means that if a terrorist organization gets a nuclear weapon, it means that someone gave it to them. And so it's fairly easy to find out who gave it to them, and this is probably why this has never happened so far. But you cannot rule out the possibility that this may happen eventually. Now, I think the most interesting part is the political will. Who has the ability and decision capacity to say, yes, now we go to nuclear war? Because obviously it has not been used since World War II. And the mythological impact of nuclear warheads and nuclear bombs has been huge because of movies, because of, in the popular culture, we always have seen movies of post-apocalyptic worlds like Mad Max and others. And the mere use of nuclear weapons is something extremely, extremely scary for all of us. So any country who would start to use them would be immediately seen as extremely evil and extremely beyond any reasonable aspects. And in fact, how nuclear weapons were to be used, at least officially, since the end of the 1940s, have always been, there's no country who said we will use nuclear weapons first. They always said we will only use them if attacked or if our survival is at stake. That was the official reason, because now we know, because of course some archives have been declassified, especially from United States and also from the Soviet Union, that there had been plans to use nuclear weapons immediately as first strike. And most of these plans came from the United States. In fact, in 1952, the United States had a real plan of attack to completely obliterate the Soviet Union without warning, as a surprise attack. And this is what, by the way, in the media, in the movies, they always said it would be the opposite. They always said, oh, Russia will attack us in a surprise attack and things like that. Russia never planned to have surprise attacks on the West. They planned to use nuclear weapons in a war immediately. That's true. But they never planned to attack with nuclear weapons as a surprise attack. So it is interesting to see that America has been planning for aggressive nuclear war, in fact, since 1946, but that was just suggestions. But the real plans of attack started in 1952, and these plans were ready in 1959, and they had been suggested to President Eisenhower, which refused them. And in 1962, the same general, Curtis LeMay, in fact, his name, proposed them to President Kennedy to destroy Russia. But if I tell you the plans, just as it's not really funny, but to give you an idea, I think they planned for something like 7,000 nuclear warheads to be sent on Russia, China, and Eastern Europe. Moscow alone would receive 180 nuclear warheads. So this is an extermination attempt. This is not just winning a war. It's completely leveling and destroying every single person who would inhabit Russia and completely take it out of the world. And so it sounds insane, of course, because when you look into the details of what is the effect of an explosion, and you look at the real effects in Hiroshima and Nagasaki, and even when they did plan, they did simulation. The effects of the blast, the fire, the radiation is quite huge. It's not a complete total death of everything, but very near that. So this was quite crazy, in fact. But they were serious about it. They put the military power and the forces of America at full speed to be able to deliver this in the 50s and 60s. So what about today? What are the scenarios? Well, first of all, we cannot exclude scenarios of local wars. And in today's world, well, clearly there is still tension between India and Pakistan, but I think it's unlikely, because this is a typical case where you have two countries which have the means to completely destroy the other. So why would you do it? This makes no sense. So probably, if they are sane and if they are logic, this will not happen. Another scenario is what the media has put forward in the last few years of Iran and Israel. I don't believe it, because Israel face no threats from Iran, and they know it. It's just media and propaganda. But in reality, Israel is not threatened by Iran. So I don't believe that Israel would strike Iran, at least not with nuclear weapons. Israel has a policy of, they call this the Samson option, which means that if they are threatened with invasion and they would lose an invasion, which is completely unlikely today because they have such overwhelming military power today, well, in that scenario, they would use their nuclear warheads to destroy all of their enemies. And I don't know if that includes me. I don't know, but I fear that it does. So 400 nuclear warheads is enough to destroy quite a lot of the world. But I think it's a bit unlikely. Why would Israel and Iran go on a war like that? It makes no sense. The third local scenario is North Korea and South Korea, but none of them has anything to gain with anything more than boasting that they have weapons and making a lot of money with the sanctions and black market that goes around it. So I think it's unlikely. There has been in the last 15 years one likelihood, which I believe is probably gone now, which was that the United States had developed, not only them, Israel as well, what they call the mini nukes, which are miniaturized nuclear warheads that they can put on some very small precision bombs or missiles. Well, you know how American precision bombs and missiles are. Well, roughly, these were to be used to destroy a factory or an underground research center or a bunker of command and control. So these things were considered to be used in Iraq against Saddam Hussein. They were considered to be used against the nuclear research of Iran, and they were strongly suggested in the 2000s. From 2003 to 2010, there was the possibility that the United States would launch such an attack. But this is today it's out of the question because, in fact, I believe that the scenario that we talked that Sheikh Imran Hussein talked earlier is more probable, unfortunately. And this is the fact that, at least from the United States point of view, and remember, in the 90s, there was this Project for a New American Century. That was this lobbying group that became part of the Bush administration and that pushed for total dominance of the United States on energy resources and economies of the world, and making sure that there would be no competition from emerging powers such as China and Russia. And of course, in that matter, they failed, and they spent at least two, but probably at least 3 or 4 times that amount, thousands of billions of dollars, so $2 to $8 trillion for their wars in Iraq, Afghanistan, and across the world. So that plan of controlling the world through economic and military means has failed. And what you see today is the United States, and this was the theme of my conference in August, if you remember. It has been put online today, so I'm happy that it's out at last. The United States not only has failed in its economic and military dominance on the world, and that failure is being obvious more and more to more and more people, including in America, especially in America. The economic power that was based on the military strength, but also the petrodollar, is decreasing. Now, more and more countries are dealing oil, petrol, in euros or in other currencies. And the world economy is reorganizing across also local economic partnerships between China and Russia, between the BRIC countries, and so on. And so that dominance is fading, and it is more and more obvious as inside the United States you see poverty and economic collapse growing every day. Despite what you hear in the news, which are fake numbers, if you look at the real data from the economy, you see massive unemployment growing every day for the last almost 10 years now. And the war machine and the owners of the United States of America, it's not the American people, it has nothing to do with them, but the owners of that country, of that nation, what Eisenhower used to call the military-industrial complex, which one should add the financial oligarchy that also runs in more and more, sees that their machine of world domination is not functioning anymore, and it's breaking down. So there is a very significant scenario that to avoid, when everything is lost, there's only one way to go is war, because war can throw a lot of things in the air, and they still have a powerful military, which I don't believe that that most of the American military is not willing to follow the orders to go for another war. But you can have another 9/11, you can have another inevitable mess somewhere in the world, and indeed today the most probable one is what is happening around Syria. And clearly, as Sheikh said, the involvement of Turkey, which may be an autonomous, it's very hard to assess if this is something that NATO supports, if it's something that President Erdogan, which I like to call Enver Pasha II, for those who know history, is it something that he and his family needs because they need the money flow from the different trades that there is with the occupied territory of ISIS? It's difficult to say, but certainly this is a place today where things can be very hot. And when you have a lot of moving parts from many countries, you have NATO You have the legal Syrian government army. You have different terrorist groups supported by different countries. You have Turkey, you have Iran, you have all these, and Russia, of course, all these powers with powerful weapons in a very small part of land. Mistakes can happen, and some mistakes can be provoked. And then the consequences are very hard to say. Maybe Turkey sends planes to bomb forces inside Syria, and maybe Russians shoot down some of Turkish planes, and then Turkey closes down the Bosphorus so that ships from Russia cannot supply its bases in Syria. And then what? It's very hard to say. Certainly not, I do not know the future, but certainly there are scenarios very likely that can go very, very far. And again, the rulers, the owners of the United States may basically think, how about we reboot everything? And when I look at the scenarios of the 1950s, the arrogance was that if we completely exterminate our enemies before they can act, then we are the only ones standing, which is a completely insane approach considering the power of nuclear weapons. And I should add that with nuclear weapons, you have also bacteriological warfare. Okay, chemical warfare is not likely in that kind of scenarios, but certainly bacteriological warfare is. And Russia and the United States still have very, very advanced and powerful biological weapons that could be released as well. So, or by mistake, which is also a possibility. So certainly, we have to watch very, very carefully what's happening today in Syria and in that region, because the possibility that this escalates to, again, that scenario which is completely crazy, which could come to say, well, we're losing our military power, we're losing our economy, let's launch the missiles and let's destroy Russia and China. And so then, by default, we are the only ones left standing. At least this is what the leaders of the United States may be thinking. And of course, on the other side, and I'm absolutely convinced, looking at the technology and studying the technology, that Russia has not only the capacity to detect a launch, but has the political will. Russia has lost 20 million people every war they do recently, and they won. They can lose 100 million. And they will not accept, they will not just die, that's it. They will retaliate, and they will retaliate with all of their 6,000 nuclear warheads. And yes, they will retaliate against all the bases and the control centers and the military of the United States and NATO. And yes, a lot of them are in Europe, and a lot of them are in the Middle East and around the world. The United States has bases in, I think, 180 countries around the world. This is a lot of targets, but that's much less than the 6,000 warheads that Russia have. Russia has also the ability, a very strong ability of second strike, which means that even if the unlikely scenarios that all of its nuclear forces would be wiped out, they still have bombers and missiles, which is impossible. Or not all missiles can be destroyed on the ground. Some of them are mobile and so on. But there's then submarine-launched missiles, which are extremely powerful. And each missile has multiple warheads. And you don't need 6,000 warheads to destroy North America. You need probably 2 or 3 that you detonate in the atmosphere, in the stratosphere, in fact, that create electromagnetic pulses. This is something very well mastered today, that will completely fry every computer and every electric line of the country, unless they are extremely protected. But you and I don't have these kind of protections for most of our items and the cars, the electric system. And if that falls down, that's it. The calculation, the scenarios that even the American military do, they estimate that if electricity falls down because of EMP attack in the United States, they have 90% death in the next 6 months, because the economy is dead, there's no food, there's no water, nothing functions. 90% of Americans die. So they know that this is a madness. But this does not preclude that the people who rule it don't care. In fact, I'll give you some examples. In the 1950s, when there was this big scare of nuclear war, the United States, and I studied that last year, have developed a very strong mean to educate the people on what to do in case of nuclear attack. And this is very interesting because this is very valid today. What to do in case in case of a nuclear explosion, what you can do, and so on and so on. They also developed plans for shelters, and they would incite people, especially near the cities, to have shelters next to their house. Something that here in Switzerland, for those of you who are Swiss, you know how much we still have them. We have something like 7,000 big shelters in Switzerland, and every house has a shelter. So we have we have 700,000 shelters in Switzerland. And so we had this plan for every single person in Switzerland to have a shelter with food and water, and we still have them. Some of us don't have food and water. We have the wine cellar for some. There's been transformations, but certainly in the 50s and 60s there was concern to tell the people how to be saved in case of war. From 2001, from September 11, 2001, in America, there was a big concern, at least officially, but they put a lot of money on that, to say, what if there is a terrorist attack with a nuclear weapon? Okay? That was their, I think, not likely scenario, unless they made it happen on themselves, of course, as I said before. But what is interesting is that from 2001, they spent even more money, but not to educate the people, not to build shelters. No. To save the government and the important elements of society, whatever that means, and I believe it's the owners, in case of nuclear war. So they have built big shelters with lots of food, lots of equipment to withstand a long time in case of nuclear war. But this time, they made zero investment for the people. So my suspicion, and it's more than a suspicion, it's a certainty, they don't care anymore about saving their own people. So they would be, I think, for them it's possible to go to war and have most of their people die because they don't care. Russia, on the other hand, since 2005, has been building big-time nuclear shelters for the population. In Moscow alone, they added, in 2010, they started to build 5,000 additional big shelters for the people. And they obviously don't do this because they like to spend money. It's because they think that it's a possibility that we are back again into the threat of nuclear war. Now, the problem for all of us is that, first of all, from the movies that we have seen when we were kids and that are still coming out, we imagine nuclear war as this thing that destroys everything, that people who come out, they are mutated, and there are all those sorts of crazy things which are not substantiated by science. In fact, even Einstein, in the early 50s, wrote that he was saying that nuclear war is not the end of the world. It's only going to kill 2/3 of the people. I think he was a bit optimistic. I think it will kill more than 2/3 of the people if there is a full nuclear war in the world. But it is true that it's not the end of the world. There are going to be a lot of areas which are not destroyed by the blast. And in fact, if you live in the countryside, there is no reason that you are a target or near a target unless you are near a base, a military base. In fact, the weapons of today, they are extremely precise, and therefore the yield is much smaller than it used to be. This is also some advances in technology. They used to have weapons that had big, especially in the 50s and 60s, very, very powerful weapons because they wanted to destroy a city, or to be sure that hitting roughly near a target, it would still destroy the target. Today with the precision, GPS, and the precision is immediate, on the target. So they actually did weapons which have much lesser yield and therefore less destruction, but because they're more precise, they destroy immediately the point. And of course, also the big change is that cities are not anymore the target, because why bother destroy a city when, again, electromagnetic pulses from a blast in the atmosphere can destroy electricity, and therefore all the supply systems of the city stop, and therefore no food comes in the city anymore, no water functions, and then people starve. So why destroy the city per se? So the tactics of usage have evolved a little bit. So we have to take a bit out from our mind the myth of the movies that of that. It's at the same time it's still terrifying, but at the same time we can do something ourselves to work on it and to first of all be away from the potential target. So don't live near a military base. Don't live. I'm afraid I have to agree with you. Don't live in most of European countries and certainly NATO countries, which are going to be involved whether they like it or not in this war. Because I'm sorry, but if Russia gets attacked, they're not going to say, oh, well, we like France, they're nice people, but they've been bombing us. But we know it's not the French people. No, they will retaliate. They will destroy the bases in France. They will blast a few nuclear plants, and France will be destroyed. And UK will be even more destroyed because there's so many American bases in the UK and Germany. So it is very difficult. So I studied that because, of course, I'm living in Switzerland and I'm not going away. I know I'm far away from any blast, but certainly radiation, fallout, is a concern. So clearly, I started to work out, and this is very pragmatic, is how do you work out? So it happens that I've been traveling to Chernobyl in Ukraine. I visited the nuclear plant, well, not too near, but about 50 meters. So near enough, and certainly around, and to see the effects of what happens. It is not a nuclear explosion, well, it's not a bomb, but certainly a nuclear plant that explodes like Fukushima, or in that case, Chernobyl, is a very interesting place where you can learn and interview a lot. So in fact, for this book, I've interviewed a lot of experts in nuclear warfare, in the management of the power plants in Switzerland, but also in France. In France, they didn't want to answer officially, but I did find the people who would answer without putting their names. And so to learn, of course, the risks and assess them, but also to learn what we can do to prepare ourselves. And clearly, this preparation, there's really two things that are important. The first of all is information. You need to know that there is nuclear war. And believe me, if a nuclear warhead strikes Paris, you don't know here. You don't see it. Probably you will know because suddenly the media will talk about it. But what if all the media around the world stop broadcasting because of these magnetic pulses? Well, that's clearly something you need to know. If tomorrow morning all the media, all the computers drop, and maybe your car doesn't start, and there is a massive blackout, and it seems to be worldwide, or at least in a very large region, there is a possibility that there has been nuclear war, and you don't know about it because maybe you're not in a place that is targeted. And if there is no news, how can you know? You need someone who walks to tell you. We take for granted that communications are easy and worldwide and satellites. But if these things stop because of that war, you don't know. So you need to think. And you know now, and those people who will read the book will know what to do to inform themselves or to guess. And it's not a certainty. But if there is a blackout, yes, probably there is a chance that something very bad has started. And then you know that it's not the time to go around and breathe the nice new air, and it's maybe time to do some steps towards the second element, which is protection. And you don't need to build a bunker and go into a shelter. If you have one in Switzerland, yes, it's interesting, but this is not the most important thing. Is certainly to know how you can protect yourself from the fallout, how you can get clean food, how you can filter and clean the water you drink. If you are already thinking about these things, you have a huge step ahead in terms of keeping your health and not succumbing from fallout and radiation. And of course, this is very complex topic. This is something that I had to go back in my physics books and get new ones to make sure that we can explain how it works very easily. And again, Ukraine was a very interesting experience talking with people in Ukraine that were there when Chernobyl exploded and what they are still doing, because there are still people who live in areas which are quite contaminated, and not the majority of them are not ill. They know and they have learned what to do, what kind of food you eat, what kind of food you don't eat, how you clean it, how you boil it, how you prepare it. All these things are very easy and simple once you know them, but honestly, who knows today what to do? How do you prepare meat? Do you boil it or you don't boil it? Well, then you discover that if you boil it with a lot of salt, if that meat was contaminated, 90% of the contamination goes away. Well, now you know. But these are very simple things that we can learn, as an example, that Ukrainian and Belarusian people have learned through difficult pain, unfortunately for them. And of course, this doesn't preclude the fact that if you're near a place where a nuclear warhead hits, if you're a few hundred meters away, you die, for sure. So I'm not telling that you can survive anything. If that happens on you, and you live near that military base or near that communication center that perhaps you don't even know about, and that is a target, well, then you meet your maker. And I hope for you that you have been a good person. But, there's nothing guaranteed. That's something I always want to make sure. But one other thing that is important to say, and I will conclude on that, because I think I want to leave a lot of space for questions, is the following: as I quickly talked about the United States scenario about the EMP. If global nuclear war happens, then you go back to the scenario I presented last time in my conference, and definitely that I talk in all my books, is that nuclear war means total collapse of the global economy. Local economies may still exist, but the global economy, at least for a long time, and that may be years, if not decades, is gone. Because you do not recover like that from the destruction of the supply chains, of all the systems that transport goods, especially food, from one place to another. So you have to think about where you live. And the answer for any one of you who live in a city is no. To the question that are we self-sustainable in terms of food and water? The answer is no. We import food everywhere. And therefore, if the import systems are breaking down, because who is going to take a truck and say, oh, I'm going to bring my tomatoes across half of Europe to feed the people in Paris because there has been nuclear war? No, you stay home. You stay home. And if someone says, no, but I really need to sell the tomatoes, you still don't do it. And they say, if you don't do it, I don't pay you. Well, I don't care. I'm not going to travel half of Europe in a place where nuclear war has happened and there's radiation. And you stay home. So this is very simple behavior. So no one will do anything for a long time unless you are prepared with everything that I explained in my first book. So the economic collapse will follow. Now, whether some people are planning for economic collapse as a way to gain power, this is not something I know, but it's possible. But certainly, the good news in this disastrous scenario is that if you prepare yourself to be self-sufficient in terms of water and food and the other things that I explained in my other books, you have not more to do. We don't need to buy gas masks. We don't need to buy nuclear suits. We don't need to build a shelter and go inside and live for not even months or years, but even weeks underground. You don't need all that. You shut the windows, you stay home for a few days, you wait for rain to come down, and you inform yourself, and you live relatively small. And where you live is the most important part, is that you don't live in the cities. You live outside. You live in places where, like I live in the mountains. Who's going to bomb the mountains? There's no point. There's no need. There's no strategy. Of course, we'll get fallout. Yes, maybe, probably. But this is not, you don't want to live near targets. So these are things that I explained, but certainly it's important to understand the process, to understand what is possible. And the Sheikh, I think, described a very, probably what I also think is the most likely scenario is that something starts with what is happening in Syria. Maybe not tomorrow morning, maybe not next week. Who knows? Maybe, we had a big scare exactly 2 years ago, or 1.5 years ago, in September 2014, when there was suddenly the Russian fleet, the American fleet, there was Israeli submarines, all in this little piece of water off Latakia of Syria. And there was a big uncertainty, and of course we don't know all the news on the moment they happened, but there was a Syrian plane that was shut down, and it was very tense. Nothing happened. Now it's tense again. Maybe nothing happened. Maybe cooler heads prevail. Maybe someone phones Mr. Erdogan and says, no, 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 if you do something, we are going to be extremely angry at you. And maybe things quiet down, and maybe they start again in 3 months. Certainly, this situation is not, it's very hot right now. It can become a little bit less hot, but it will keep being hot. So in my opinion, it is also around Syria and with the countries, the nations, the powers that are involved, that go from Saudi, from Iran, from Israel, from Turkey, and of course NATO and Russia, and even China, which means it's all the people who matter and who have this potential for nuclear war who are involved. And there's always, whether you believe that man's actions are controlled or written by superior powers or not, some unexpected things can happen. And unexpected things can lead to irrational decision, to rash decision. And when you have nuclear weapons in the mix, a mistake can be extremely, extremely costly. So with that, I've finished. I remember that if you want to read my book, it's translated in Arabic with the forward of Sheikh Imran Hussein, and you can find it online or on Arabic libraries everywhere. Thank you very much.